preparing to live stream. The blue line is moving. I think we're live. We appear to be live. It looks like we're live. We're live on the other screen.
Yes, I'm excited.
I am so excited. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. It's going to be so incredible.
Yes, it is, y'all. Make sure you pull out your pens, your notes, because I am just feeling like giving away all the things today. So
I have my trusty pencil because I'm 5 years old
come
and
on,
my notebook.
come on and have an actual pencil. Come on and have an actual pencil.
And I have an actual pencil sharpener.
That's adorable. I love that.
So let me introduce you to the people who don't know you but need to know you and should know you so you can be flooded with friend requests. So Stacy and I connected a while back on these Facebook streets, and we were trying to do this before, and life be life in, but we're here now. So Stacy is absolutely obsessed with taking online brands to new heights through strategic marketing. As a strategic marketing consultant and Facebook ads expert, she teaches CEOs how to make more money, gain their time back, and rapidly increase their visibility to impact the world with their brilliance. So nobody wants to be seen and heard more than people who are creating podcasts. And there's a reason for that, because they're not just doing it for poops and ha-has, they're doing it for a purpose. So how can Facebook ads help people get their podcast seen?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. That's a great introduction. I'm excited to be here, y'all. And so I think what I want you to picture is as we're kind of like starting and giving you like some context into, answering that question is like, I want you to picture your marketing or picture your podcast like a bridge, right? Like your podcast is the bridge between where somebody is at on one side of the bridge and your offer is on the other side, right? So setting the foundation, right? Like essentially your job as a podcaster or, most of the people who, are listening to this podcast or working with Bethany or in our audience is right. Like the goal of your podcast is to get people to buy your offer. And so you're creating all of this content to help people, to give people all the information that they need to work with you, to handle objections, all this kind of stuff, right? And so if that is the job of your podcast and your podcast is a foundational piece of your marketing strategy, which it should be, and we can definitely go into that a little bit later. But if you think about that and take that context and visualize your podcast being a bridge, the goal for you then now, after you've established this bridge, is to get people to come to your bridge. Because there's a lot of different bridges in this forest, y'all. There are a lot of different podcasts out there. There are a lot of different bridges, right? There are a lot of different people trying to sell offers and sell things with their podcasts. A lot of people in your same space, right? You have likely a lot of us have a lot of competitors. And so if you think about that, and the goal is to get people to come to your bridge, and yet there are so many other bridges out there, right? The thing that you have to do as the business owner, as the podcaster, is to figure out how to get people to come to your bridge. And Facebook ads are a great way to do that because it allows you to break past who is already in your current ecosystem or already in your current sphere. And that's not a friend of a friend of a friend. It allows you to break past that. It allows you to reach listeners and people who have no idea that you exist just because they don't live down the street from you and because Facebook is not showing them your content, right? Like that's the only reason that they don't know you exist and they have not been able to come into your world to be able to consume your content and to walk across your bridge and get to your offers. And so when you invest in Facebook ads, it allows you to reach beyond your current sphere. It allows you to get your podcast in front of people who are searching for your content across the world, or who are looking for a voice like yours and to hear a message that you specifically have to say. And the ads just allow us to do that on a more amplified scale, right? Like we get to do that with organic marketing. We do that with a lot of different things, but ads are a way to get millions of people to consume your content, or thousands of people, new eyeballs on your podcast, or new earballs on your podcast, right? You get thousands more listeners in a lot faster time. The only thing that you have to do is have the right strategy, have the right investment, and making sure that you're talking to the right people, right? And because there's so many people out there in Facebook land, but yeah, I'll stop there because I know I can keep going, right? But that's I want to set the context, right? Like you got to understand that your podcast should be a foundational piece of your marketing strategy, and ads are a piece of the puzzle, right? Ads are a way to get more people to consume your podcast. And so when you're thinking about ways to get more listeners, advertising is definitely something that should be on your radar for 2024 and 2025.
There's so you said so many things, and as a good host, I am going to circle back to
Yeah.
all of the beautiful things that you said. So when you're talking about marketing and having people purchase from you, people should be using their podcast as they use a brand. And if even if you don't have a business, even if you have a podcast, but you're not necessarily connecting your business to your podcast, you are still your own brand, whether you have a business or not. And I think that a lot of people say, oh, I'm not serious about my podcast. I'm just doing this thing, not realizing that a lot of the times that's when podcasts blow up,
Mhm.
that they're showing up consistently, they're sharing their genius, and all of a sudden, people want to sponsor them. Or all of a sudden, they are getting offers and they just want some more download numbers. They want some more ear holes listening to them, and they aren't quite sure how to do it. And I think that Facebook is a beautiful place for that, because Facebook is really the platform in which storytelling connection, because it was kind of like the first one
Yeah.
besides MySpace, which y'all young boos don't know about that. But Facebook was the first opportunity to really tell stories through long posts and to connect people, which is essentially what a podcast is. It's a form of connecting with stories or with sharing your genius or sharing your information, but you're doing it in a conversational style. Whether it's a narrative style, interview style, solo, you're doing it in a connective conversation way. And I think Facebook is the perfect place for that in lieu of, let's say, a LinkedIn ad.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say, I definitely agree with that in a sense that, you think, and this, I've been in marketing for 13 years. And so one of the things I love about marketing is really kind of seeing how things have evolved
Mhm.
over time. And if you think about, like how Facebook kind of really, really kind of accelerated in during the pandemic, right? Like everybody was in the house, everybody was, lacking that personal connection that we have for people. So we were all online, all on Facebook, and that kind of thing. And I think about, like how now that we've, come out of it and we've, moved forward, people still are craving that in-person connection. People are craving that connection that they have with people. And so as advertisers, our ads have to really kind of build connection. And the great way to do that is with your podcast, like you were saying, right? Podcasts are about storytelling. It's about conversations. It's about feeling like I don't know. I know when I listen to podcasts, I feel like I know the podcast host, right? Like I feel like I know them. I feel like I have that connection with them. I'm listening to them while I'm, on my walks and while I'm, driving and while I'm, on doing different things. And so you feel that connection. And so one of the best ways to foster that connection, to grow that connection, and get more people is to invest in social platforms. And infuse the storytelling that you infuse in your podcast to make sure you get the right people, because there are 2.9 billion monthly active users on Facebook. That means that 2.9 billion people log into this app at least once every 30 days. Think about how many times you log into Facebook, right? Like I know I log in about 10, 20 times a day. But
I
there's a
have a whole problem. I have a whole Facebook
exactly.
addiction problem.
Exactly. Exactly. I have conversations with myself about it all the time. I'm like, please, you need to do something about this.
I'm like, do better,
You
Bethany,
think
do better.
about, like, Instagram as well, because when you run ads on Facebook, you can run ads on Instagram because Meta owns both channels. So you kind of get two channels for one when you're running ads. But Instagram has 1.9 billion monthly active users, right? So there's a lot of people on this platform, but everybody's not going to be your top number one fan that listens to your podcast, right? Like everybody is not going to resonate with you and your message. And so it's beautiful to be able to put yourself out there and allow Facebook to bring you to get your message in front of your people. And then you can bring your people to you, because again, they don't know your podcast exists because they just have not heard of it, right? Like, like we have to do the due diligence of making sure that people come to our podcast and making sure we get our podcast in front of the right people, rather than just hoping that they will, search for us and find us, right? Like if I think about the podcast that I really, rock with like that and I really follow, most of the time it came from either I was listening a guest podcast, I saw something on social media about it, right? And so, we have to make sure that we're doing that due diligence to get our podcast in front of the right people. And just because the landscape is crowded and, so organic marketing is a little limited because it's really just going to show your content to your immediate circle and then people who are like maybe two connections out. Right. Like we have to do the due diligence of investing in channels that will allow us to break past that and to find the people who really, really do want to, become stands of ours and get them to listen to our podcast. And ads are just such a great way to do that.
I love that word investment because investment is so important. And if you are wanting to take your podcast to the next level, there is a part of you that has to be willing to have that investment, either by retaining a podcast producer, either by retaining a marketing consultant, either by creating Facebook ads. And I think on the hierarchy of expenditures for investments, Facebook ads could be a really great way to have a low barrier of entry for an investment to get your podcast heard, people that may not necessarily have heard that you had a podcast and what you were sharing on it. So, can you tell me a little bit about how you go about creating a Facebook ad? What money you want to set aside to delegate per month? How does that work? Is it by how many people see your ads? How many people uh, watch it for a specific period of time, or is it just one set fee? What is the build out for that Facebook ad for a podcast look like?
Yeah, definitely. So there's really kind of three things that you need in order to be successful or to create successful ads. And then I'll talk about budgets and how that works second, because they're kind of similar conversation, the same conversation, but kind of different lanes. And so one, if you're thinking about, getting your ads, one, there is a technical piece of it, right? Like, we know like sometimes with our podcast, there's some tech involved, right? Just with everything, there's tech involved, right? So the people that are just like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed by the Facebook ad tech. It's like, there's tech in everything. So we just gonna have to get past that, right? But, we try to make it easy for our clients and stuff like that. But either way, like, one, you want to make sure your pixel is installed on your website, right? Because the thing about podcasts and like market and running ads to your podcast, it's a little different than like running ads to a blog and stuff like that, is that some people want to run ads directly to the podcast player. And that is a strategy, right? You can absolutely do that. If you're like, hey, I just want the download numbers, that's fine, right? Like, run ads to the podcast player. But the problem is that with the Facebook pixel, it operates like a bridge, like I was saying earlier. It's a bridge between Facebook and your website. And so when your pixel is installed on your website, it essentially will allow Facebook to send signals back and forth. So it'll say, oh, I sent Sally to your website. What did Sally do? Did Sally take the desired action? She did. Great. Let me send that signal back to Facebook so we can find more people like Sally. That's essentially how the pixel works. Um, and so the problem, though, you can only install the pixel on a site you own. Like you can't go install your pixel on Apple's podcast player, right? And so when you're sending ads directly to a podcast player, you're losing tracking, right? Like so Facebook is sending traffic, it's sending Sally there, but it doesn't know what Sally's doing. Did Sally leave the page? Did she actually listen to the podcast? What did she do, right? Did she just close the app, right? So Facebook just doesn't know, so it's just going to keep sending people there, right? And it's just not going to have that back and forth communication. And so you want to make sure that your tech is set up correctly, right? Like, so have your Pixel installed, all that kind of good stuff. If you do actually want a guide on how to install your Pixel, just send me a DM on Instagram, Facebook, whatever. I'm all over these social streets. Send me a DM and I will absolutely send you a guide that I send to my clients for free. But anyway, so installing your Pixel is really important whether you're running ads or not, because you want to get that tech stuff. But once you get past the tech, let's talk about the fun stuff, right? Like, so I always will mention the tech because it's part of it. But talking about the fun stuff, like how do you create effective? One, messaging is a big piece of it. So you really have to nail down like who is your ideal listener, what do they care about, and why do they want to listen to your show specifically? What are they? Because we have to figure out like what's in it for them, right? Like that's what you're going to put into your ad copy. That's what you're going to create your ad, your video ads, your still images, that kind of thing. Make sure you're attracting the right people. The second thing is you want to make sure you have a customer journey that can actually move them to actually, buying from you or becoming a listener, right? Whether your goal is to grow your downloads and just grow your listeners because you're looking to get sponsorships, right? You want to make sure you're capturing people on your email list as well. Because even if you're just caring about downloads, having an email list and saying, hey, sponsor, I will charge you X amount of dollars to run an ad in my podcast. And then I will also upsell you an actual email list to my newsletter. then you start to make more money, right? Then you start to really treat your podcast like a business, because whether you're trying to get downloads and sponsors, it's still a business, or whether you're trying to sell your offers, it's still a business. And so, having an email list is something that's essential, and that's an essential part of your customer journey. And so I like to recommend things like taking your podcast and creating a lead magnet of it, saying like, hey, I'll send you my top 5 downloaded episodes on XYZ topic. Just give me your email list, right? That way they get your email list, you get them on your list, and you get them to listen to the podcast, right? So you're getting a twofer, right? So that customer journey and mapping out where you're sending people is really important, and because it directly relates back to your business goals. And then the last thing that you want to make sure that you have, so you have messaging, your messaging's on point, your customer journey is on point, and then you just want to make sure that you're building your ads correctly. And this is also with the tech piece of like having the pixel installed, making sure you're setting up your ad accounts correctly, making sure you're having a diverse number of ads that you're running, stuff like that, right? So so there is a piece of it that's about structure. And so that's where I see most people, like 90% of the people that I audit their Facebook ads, there's a structural problem. And it was so prevalent that I added it to my framework, because it originally was not a part of my framework, because I just was like, well, if you set it up, go boom, 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 you set it up correctly. But I see so many people that are doing it incorrectly, that I've really kind of added it to my framework of like, now I need to actually teach people how to, understand why they need to set things up correctly and actually how to do it. So those are really kind of the things that you need in order to be successful with ads. Again, that's messaging, that is a clear customer journey, and that is making sure your ads are technically set up correctly. And once you do that, if you nail those things, then it's just about testing and figuring out what works and trying new things and that kind of stuff. But those are really the 4 things. Did you want me to go into budget now, or did you want to say anything with that, and then I can go into talking about budget?
I think it's so funny because when you and I had this conversation, there were so many things that were correlating between marketing and with creating a successful podcast for however you deem success. So if you deem success as having a lot of listeners or having a lot of downloads and marketing from your podcast, you have to do the same steps that you had just discussed. You have to make sure that your messaging is correct. You have to know who your freaking audience is, and you are sharing the information that they want and need and desire. You have to make sure that your tech is correct, because during my beginning stages of this journey in podcasting, I thought that if you had a good story, it could hold water. I quickly learned that it was a colander that was holding that water. All of the water was just coming out. So if your tech is trash, people don't have the time nor the desire to continue to want to listen to it. It puts a hiccup in the whole system, and is essentially the same way. And I just want to quickly ask a question that Cameron had. Cameron, thank you so much for watching. Gail, thank you so much for watching. She wanted to know, is it the chicken or the egg question? If you're just starting up, is it worth it to do the Facebook ads now, or should you have a level of listenership to go with the ads before you start creating Facebook ads or paying for Facebook ads?
I love this question. This is such a great question because, I'll start by saying this. Everything in marketing works, right? Like if you go the route of running like ads work as long as you have the right budget and strategy and all that kind of good stuff. So you have to decide what you have more of. If you have more money than you have time, then you might want to start to invest in ads, right? And just really kind of like get some listeners and stuff like that. But most of us in these online streets, most of us as podcasters are really kind of just starting out. We're not making a whole lot of money from our podcast, or, we're not making so much money with our podcast that, we can just dump a bunch of money into ads right out the gate, right? And so what I like to teach clients, and I like to tell people, is that I would like for you to start with organic marketing first and then start to layer on paid. Because paid is like an amplifier. The analogy that I like to use for this kind of question is, I want you to start to look at ads as adding fuel to a fire, right? Like, if the fire is not burning, if there is nothing, if there's no spark, then you're just pouring gas on the ground, right? Like you don't know what's working. You don't know what's actually going to blow up, right? You're just kind of, just pouring stuff and then now the ground's wet, right? But if you have a fire and you have something that's burning and you're like, hey, I have an inkling of who my clients are or who my ideal listeners are. I have a way of getting them on my email list, and converting, and warming them up, and telling them about my offers and other things the ways that they can work with me, right? Like if that, I want you to start there, because ads will always be there, and ads will be you'll be able to add them to the mix and just blow up what you're already doing. So I like to go the route of put it out there organically first, grow, get some listeners, have some conversations with people, really kind of start to understand who your ideal audience is, and then start to invest in ads. Because a lot of us out there, like, and I'm sure, Bethany, as well, where you start is not where you finish in business, right? Like where I started my podcast and who I was talking to and what I was talking about, right? Like it was all about marketing. It's all about business and, marketing for business owners. But there and you start to put content out there and you start to see what's working and what's resonating with people, right? Because in the beginning it's like, okay, here's what I think is going to resonate with my folks, let me record some episodes, let me put it out there, let me see what resonates. And then you'll start to get signals of like that episode that I thought was going to be really going to blow up, people really weren't feeling that topic, or that title just it wasn't right, because sometimes it is like the topic is fire and the episode is fire, but the title just doesn't attract people, right? And so you're not getting the downloads and the listenings, right? So there's a lot of like, testing that's involved in marketing in general, right? Like a lot of people are not really testing. We're looking at our marketing as something that we have to check off of a box, like, oh, I posted about my podcast today, but we're not actually going back and looking at the data and pulling that and understanding like, what are my top, out of the last 50 episodes that I have, before I create another episode, what were my top 5 topics that actually, got the most downloads, and got, whether you got some, some leads from it or people reached out about it or whatever, right? Like, what was it? And then you base what you're doing on that, not just checking off a box of like, oh, I recorded a podcast episode today. And that doesn't matter whether you have a lifestyle podcast and you're just focusing on like, growing your listeners, or you have a more, a podcast that's going to be selling your offers, right? Like you have to dig into your data in order to understand what works. And so that's what I would say to your question, is that start with organic, right? Like I know it's a hustle. I get it. It fucking sucks sometimes, right? Like, and if you feel like you have a lot, you're doing a lot, and sometimes you don't feel like things are moving. But let me tell you, like I had a podcast before I had my podcast Roadmap to 1 Million. I had a podcast that was a lifestyle podcast all about like cannabis and self-care. I grew that thing to 10,000 downloads in 1 year. And, we were really excited about it, but guess how much money it made? $0. It made $0. Okay. And so, you really so it's a lot of testing. It's a lot of figuring out. It's a lot of like trying different strategies. But once you get it though, once you figure it out, and once you're like, ooh, I know this is what works, then you want to start to invest in ads, because then it's just going to blow that up, right? Like I would rather you blow up something that works than get a whole lot of traffic and a whole lot of leads for people who just are not really fit or not really right for your podcast. Then, by just like sending it out into the Facebook ethers and just getting anybody who decided they wanted to listen, right? So that's the route I would go.
So I love the fact that you brought out that you had listeners, you had this momentum, you had the rhythm, and you didn't make any monetary return from it. And going back and looking back at that time from where you are now, it doesn't have to do with Facebook ads, but I'm just curious if you know why you adjusted to what you're doing now, and when did you have that realization? Because I think that what happens sometimes is if we're not seeing the results that we want, and that can go with anything, we literally just toss the table and say, forget it, I'm moonwalking away. And it's right before that breakthrough is about to happen.
Yeah.
And then there's other times when you're like, okay, I have to shelf this because this is no longer serving me.
Yeah.
But I'm going to create something with the knowledge that I obtained when I created the initial thing. So how, when, why did you discover this wasn't making any money? I'm going to recreate something that makes me foldable dollar bills.
Yeah. So it's interesting because that brings up a kind of like a larger kind of question for me, or a larger kind of answer than just, specific to a podcast. But the basic answer really is just that I was creating what I wanted to create, not what my audience wanted. So I because a little bit about me, like I am someone who loves to learn, like learning is in my top 5 Clifton strengths. I bring a lot of energy to learning new things. I love to learn new things. And when I discovered that cannabis was a solution to my insomnia problem, because really I went down that road because I fell asleep driving one time and it was scary. And I've always had insomnia, but that point was like, okay, it was my wake up call of like, okay, you got to get this together. And so I went down, route of trying sleeping pills, all the things. Cannabis is what worked for me. And so when I'm like passionate about something, I want to learn everything about it. Like I have so many cannabis facts in my head that you would be like, why? Why? But I read all these books, I read blogs, because I was just like, this solved my problem. I'm so excited about it. I have to learn why. And then when I learned why, I had to tell people about it. And so I created a podcast because I love to talk, yeah, as you can tell. And so I started to create this podcast, and it was very interesting. People loved the content. I was always getting, feedback of like, oh, this is so helpful, so eye-opening. But when it comes down to what I was selling in the podcast, I created a course for about self-care and cannabis that I thought that people wanted. I didn't ask anybody if they wanted this. I didn't do any market research. I didn't so I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to create. I went through, I recorded it. And so I learned so many things from this. I will never, we could talk about pre-selling because my second course, what I learned from it, actually, I'll go into that because you did ask me about that. But so I created something that I thought people wanted, not what they actually wanted. And so what I learned from that is to not do that. And so when I closed that podcast down. It's still out there. The website's still up. It's still getting downloads and SEO traffic because we really, really invested in SEO and stuff like that. But decided to shift, pivot, and we started Roadmap to 1 Million, which is our marketing podcast. And really the lessons I learned from that I applied from, the podcast was called High on Self-Care, which was a fantastic title. Oh my gosh. When that title hit me, High on Self-Care, I was like, ooh, that's it. Right? Yeah, I know podcasters out there feel me. When you get the title, you're like, ooh, that's it. But anyway, so what I learned from High on Self-Care that I applied to my podcast Roadmap to 1 Million. One is that I had to really kind of start with my audience and what they actually needed, not what I just wanted to create. Right? Because as podcasters, we get even as entrepreneurs, we get so many ideas, right? Like I get so many ideas on what to create, but I had to go back to what does my audience need to hear from me in order for them to be ready to work with me. And that is really kind of how I base my content now. It's not how-to content. A lot of my High on Self-Care was like how-to content, like how to, like how to buy the right strains, right? Like how to understand, how to buy good weed and all that kind of stuff, right? Like, that's what it was about. But now my podcast is more like, what do you have to believe in order to get to the next level in your business? What do you have to understand about yourself and your business in order to work with me specifically, right? What do you need to understand about my methodologies and the way that I teach and the way that I talk to people in order for them to be ready to work with me? And so now my podcast is really a nurturing tool. It's not a tool that I'm using to really kind of attract an audience. It's really, the goal of it is to nurture the people who are in my audience until they are ready to work with me and give them all the information they need to move them closer to working with me. So that's what I learned. And then the other thing I learned from that is to not create things ahead of time. Like I will never create another course, and then sell it again. Because what I did when I rolled out my Facebook ads course last year is I pre-sold it. I just was like, okay, this is what I want to create. This is what I'm doing. I put it out there and said, hey, I did a whole launch for it and everything. And it was definitely successful. So because I just was like, hey, I'm recording a course. I'm going to record it live. You can come and watch me record it live every week. And then at the end, I'll give you time for questions and stuff like that. So that way, you can get some live support. It was really helpful in the sense that they were able to tell me like, hey, this was confusing. This didn't make sense. I need a resource here. Can you put this into a checklist or something like that? Right. And so now I learned from that, like, don't create shit that people haven't asked you for, right? Like really, like if you have an idea for something, do some market research, talk to some people about it, and get some buyers, right? Before you go down the route of blocking off your calendar to record these 7 modules and create all this stuff, right? Like sell it first and then be upfront with people saying like, hey, I'm creating it. And if you want to get in now, like the people who enrolled in my beta price, that's the lowest price my course has ever been. I've never sold it for anything lower than what they got, right? Because that was my, thing for them. It's like, hey, you're trusting me to deliver you on a course, right? And so I will you have the lowest price that you'll ever get, that the course will ever be. And so those are the things that I've learned from that podcast. So I think it's a larger conversation than just ads and growing a podcast. It's more so like, making sure that what you're doing is in line with your audience and the people who is consuming it, rather than just something that you just want to create.
I love that. And when I had my podcast that has been on hiatus since 2022, it was very funny because we didn't do any marketing research, but essentially it was something, as you said, that I wanted. I wanted to speak to women in the podcasting industry about their experiences being in the podcasting industry. And I wanted to be super chill. So we literally sent our guests soup and chowder and we had these discussions. And then yes, we did. We got sponsors. We didn't even have one episode recorded, but because we were so aligned in with our audience, we were so aligned with what our conversation and our missions were going to be. That's when people just started trickling in. That's when we started reaching out to people and saying, hey, this is what we're interested in doing. And that's when we got sponsors when, we didn't even have our trailer recorded at the time. So
Yeah.
I think really going in with intention and mindfulness and understanding into anything, albeit Facebook ads, podcasting, marketing, business, creating a brand for yourself, even being a freaking influencer. Like there's this whole thing right now with Nora Smith, and people are like, oh, she's so fake. No, she is a person who knows that she is a brand
Yes.
and she is going to adjust accordingly. And that's what she has done. Is it fake? Yup. Did you choose to believe it was real? Yup. Like what? It is what it is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I agree. Like it's this thing, like, and it makes sense to me, like when you were saying that your podcast, was about talking to people who have a podcast, because that's what a lot of people who don't have a podcast want to know. They're like, everybody's telling me to start a podcast, but what is your experience? Are you making money from your podcast? What are you doing? How are you growing your podcast? Right? Because people, so it makes sense. So you just have to make sure that the content you're creating is aligned with your audience. And that's just a larger conversation about marketing where we're at now anyway.
yes.
Like consumers know they have the power to decide between you and your competitors and all these other people. Knowledge is at our fingertips. So I can, kind of tell if you're kind of sniff if you're giving me some BS or not, right? And so that's where consumers are at. And as consumers get more savvy, business owners have to keep up with that, right? We have to adjust our marketing to make sure that we are speaking directly to where people are at right now in their journey, and understanding that they do have information at their fingertips, that they are going to be looking up you and your competitors. There's a lot of different people in the space competing for attention, not just in your field, but like, deciding between investing in a Facebook ads consultant and investing in a podcast producer, right? Like those are decisions that people are making right now. So we have to make sure that we are aligning our content and what we're talking about to where people are at right now, and giving them the information that they need to take those steps across the bridge to being able to work with us.
Stacy, it's so juicy. It's like a peach just came off of the tree. It's just so juicy what you're dropping right now. So Gail has a quick question. Is a podcast website good for a lead magnet? And how do you drive traffic there? And you kind of touched upon that at the beginning of this conversation.
Yeah. So what I would do is, if like, here's what I did for my podcast lead magnets, like to kind of bridge that gap. So I have a couple different. So what I would do is on my podcast, I would record a series, right? So let's say like I recorded one that was called a Streamline and Scale series, and so it was all about like how to streamline your marketing so that you can scale. It was about tools that you want to use, all customer journey, all kinds of different stuff. And so it was a 4-part series. And so what I did was I recorded it. I posted it, 1 week at a time on my podcast. My podcast is weekly, so I posted it, 1 week. It was like maybe July of last year, something like that. And then what I did was I took it and I created a little workbook to go with it. I just was like, okay, here's a checklist of all the things that you want to do to streamline and scale. Here's a list of all the tools I mentioned in the episode. I put a link to the actual episodes, in the pod that are on my website, into the actual lead magnet, because I host all my podcasts on my website. Or like each podcast has its own kind of blog page on my website. And so I took that and put that into a lead magnet, and then I just put that, and then I put that behind a landing page, and it said like, hey, here's it's an audio guide. Like I tell people it's an audio guide, it's an audio series, whatever. And so what I would say is that for instead of driving traffic just to your website, where it's like like for me it's stacydeal.co/podcast. So I'm assuming that that's what you mean by using your podcast as a landing page, right? So instead of just driving traffic just to your podcast page, I would actually, put together something that leads people down the journey that you want them to take. And so that means taking a content that has a specific topic, right? So not just saying, hey, go listen to my podcast, but hey, if you want to learn how to grow, how to attract more leads, here are 3 or 4 episodes that you can listen to on my podcast that'll teach you how to do that. Because then you, as the business owner, you're like, okay, I know I'm attracting people on my list who want to attract leads. And if I have an offer that will help them attract leads, I can reach out to these people and say, hey, I have an offer for you and let's work together. Right. Like, so being a little bit more strategic about it. So instead of just, like I said, driving people to your landing page, I would curate the experience that you want them to take. Like, get some podcast episodes that have a similar topic or kind of a similar journey, put it behind a little landing page, maybe go on Canva, make a little checklist or a little cheat sheet or something like that can go with it. And then just send them there, right? And then you're driving traffic to the landing page and getting people to give you their email address, instead of, just driving them to a page where you hope that they go and listen to a podcast episode. You don't even know what episode they're going to listen to, right? Like, so like you want to make sure that you're kind of like curating that experience instead of relying on people to create their own journey, which is kind of what we do. We expect people to go to our homepage and just find their way to our services and offers and book a call with us. But you really kind of have to curate that journey, right? You have to give people like, do this first, do this second, do this third, do this fourth, and then, I'm going to make an offer to you. So that's what I would say for that question.
So, like the way that I'm going to be re-listening to this and taking my copious notes, I just can't even. So with anything, consistency is king.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there is this expectation that you put out a Facebook ad for a couple of weeks and you get frustrated and upset because you haven't seen any traction. How long should you be running a Facebook ad before you start getting the results, not necessarily that you want, or just results in general?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it really speaks to people like setting expectations. Because what I want people to understand is that when you're thinking about marketing, any channel, right? This is any marketing channel. I can make this argument for any channel. Any channel that you invest in is gonna require some time. It's gonna require some effort. It's gonna require data. And the best thing about Facebook and Instagram ads is that you get a whole lot of data. Like there's so much more data that you get when you run ads versus organic, right? Like, because, there's just like, it's just so much more, like exponentially more data that you can get when you're running ads versus when you're doing organic marketing. And so the thing about it is that you have to keep in mind that why did I lose my train of thought real quick? What were we talking about? What was the question again?
We were talking about how long you should.
Oh, how long? There we go.
It's lunchtime.
It is.
You should be eating right now. Our sugar's just dropping.
Sorry, I like my brain went off in space. But anyway, so if you think about like any channel is going to require data, it's going to require some time and testing. And so if you're thinking about ads in general, right? Like one, they're going to allow you to move a lot faster, depending on your budget. But what I like to say is that, give your ads at least like a week of getting some information in order, and then read the data and move according to the data. That's the one thing a lot of people do not do is what people are doing now, and let me know in the comments if this sounds like what you're doing. You run it, you create an ad, you put it out there, you let it run for 2-3 weeks, and then you say, this doesn't work, I'm turning it off. Like that's what a lot of people do. They're like, I've spent like, $500, $1,000, it's not working, so ads don't work, I'm done, right? But what you want to do is after that first initial couple days, you want to look at your data and see what is the data telling me, right? Like, are people actually making it to the landing page? If people are not making it to the landing page, they cannot take the desired action of getting on your email list, right? If your people are not making it to the landing page, then there's something wrong with your creative. And so you want to adjust your creative accordingly. Right. And there are benchmarks that I give my clients that I'm like, I want your click-through rate to be this. I want you, once your click-through rate is this, then let's move on and look at the next metric, which is your conversion rates, right? So it's like if people are going to the landing page, but they are not actually taking the desired action of, and downloading your freebie, is it something wrong with the landing page, or are you sending the wrong people to the landing page? Because so the thing is like, and so it's not necessarily something where you're like, if you run this for 2 weeks, it doesn't work, then then turn it off, you're done, give up, move on to something else. That's not how anything in marketing works, right? Like, if we're thinking about it, people think that ads are just so like outside of marketing. It's really not, right? Like, it's the same thing with Instagram, like, right? Like, you can create some reels, put some stuff out there, and if you're just creating reel after reel after reel for 2 weeks and you don't see any traction, but you're not looking at your data to see like, are these reels resonating? Am I getting the reach? Am I doing doing all the things people say to do, right? Like, if you're not looking at your data, then you won't know why it's not working. Like, one thing I posted on my Facebook yesterday is that people are missing the why. Like, a lot of people want to know the how. A lot of people want to know how to run Facebook ads effectively, how to get more downloads for my podcast. But why? Right? Like, why are you running ads? Right? Like, why are you using this strategy over that strategy? Right? Like, why are you using this creative over that creative? Why are you targeting this specific audience? Right? So when you can start to answer the why is going to come from data, right? Like, the why comes from looking at your Google Analytics and seeing like, oh, the reason I'm targeting women between the ages of 35 and 50 is because my data tells me that most of my clients are women between the ages of 35 and 50, right? So the why matters, not just how to run ads, not just what audience should I be targeting. Why are you targeting those specific audiences, right? What data can you pull from your business to back up the decisions that you're making? And like, so like when a lot of my ad experience comes from working at Zappos. So I was working at a company called Zappos for like 4 years, running ads for very large brands. And I remember being in that environment. This was the first time I worked in tech, the first time I worked at a job that was, that large, right? For an 8-figure company, right? Like, and so I remember feeling like having an understanding that you have to understand the why something's not working. It's not enough to just say this campaign didn't work. Why didn't it work? What do we learn from it? What are we going to do next time? And so that started to get ingrained in me, as an employee. And so now, when I'm talking to my clients and I'm looking at their, data and all that kind of stuff, I'm helping them to understand the why, right? Because then when you understand the why, you understand the data behind it, then that's going to influence all the decisions that you're making with your marketing. So if you understand why you want to use a specific podcast episode in your ads, that is important for you to understand. Like, I'm going to use this particular episode to run ads to because I get leads from it, because I get a lot of downloads from it, if that's the metric you're going for. But understand the why, because if you don't understand why, you're just doing stuff and you're not able to paint a picture of how everything fits together. And you're not able to understand, like, why am I making this pivot versus that pivot? Why am I doing this channel versus that channel? So understand the why. So there's a lot that goes in there. But I hope that I answered that question about like understanding that, it's not a specific time. It's not like I did this for 2 weeks and it doesn't work. It's like, look at your ads. What is the data telling you, right? Like, what are the specific data points that you're measuring? And when you can effectively measure those data points, you understand the why, then you can start to, figure out, like, then you'll start to assess the performance of your ads and whether they are performing well, whether you should, shift and completely do a completely new strategy, or what the better option is to take the learnings that you got from this campaign that did not work and actually figure out, like, what am I going to do about it, right? Like, how can I iterate on that? How can I, take what did work, like, what even if 90% of it didn't work, what is that 10% teaching you? Because that's important, right? It's really important to understand what is it teaching you, because that 10% then becomes 20%, 30%, 40%, right? It grows because you're adding all this, you're using the data to make informed decisions.
Oh, you asking why like warmed me like a warm blanket on like a cold winter night, because forever asking. That's actually the first conversation that I have with my launch clients. Why are you creating this podcast? Because
Yep.
if you can't articulate your why, we can't get to the episode strategy because you don't know why you're doing it. So why did you pay me all of this foldable dollar bills that you could have invested in something else? Because you have to know your why. That is the jumping point for anything. And your why will lead you to the where, how, and when.
Yeah, I agree.
So when somebody decides to run Facebook ads for a particular amount of time and they receive the data that you were just speaking of, should they then increase the allotted money to run the ads for an additional amount of time? Should they keep the price as it was? how do you feel that they should move once they have found out the breakdown of the data that the data provided?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what you want to do is you want to like when as you're learning and figuring out what the data is telling you, it's not necessarily that you want to like increase your budget right away. It's more so you want to establish your baselines so that way you can then start to establish what your budget is. And so if you're like, hey, like I need to get 50 leads into my live webinar, right? Like you want to get 50 people into your webinar, and your cost per lead is $1, right? Then I need to spend at least $50 to get 50 people into my live launch, right? But you have to establish those baselines because at the beginning you might not have $1 cost per lead. In the beginning, you might have a $20 cost per lead, right? And you have to do the due diligence of instead of increasing your budget, the actual overall amount you're spending, but your focus is to lower your cost per lead until you start to really establish a baseline where you're like, hey, I started my campaign at like, so I'll give you an example to put this in context. So I have a client, or I had a client that I was working with as their CMO. And we were, a lot of our clients come to us when they're running ads. And so we really can consult with them and their team on their ad strategy. And so we're digging into the ads and, playing a big role in that kind of stuff. And so when we started our ads, we were at like a $16 cost per lead, right? Like we started $16 cost per lead. It's like, okay, our focus now is to lower our cost per lead. We eventually got to a point where we were doing testing over, it was probably like 4 or 5 months, and, of testing and trying this, trying that. I'm not going to say it wasn't a very large spend. I don't want you to think 4 months and think, we spent $50,000. It was probably maybe like, $5,000 to $10,000, something like that. And so we 4 months testing heavy, heavy, heavy. And we got to a point where our cost per lead was $3. And it was, just established that with like every week, $3, $2.50, or another $3.20. So we had an established baseline of like $3 is our average cost per lead, right? Based on where we're at right now. Are we always actively trying to lower our cost per lead? Yes. But if we have our baseline and we establish that $3 cost per lead gets us really quality leads, and then we can start to do the math. I'm saying like, hey, like this is I need to get X amount of people into my launch. My average cost per lead is $3. This is the amount of money that I need to spend in order to get that 50 people into my launch. And so that's how you kind of have to look at the budget. So it's not necessarily just like you have to spend this amount in order for you to get results. It's more so like if you're actively testing and watching what you're doing and making optimizations over time and stuff like that, then you can start to establish baselines, and then that will give you a better number to establish your budget rather than an arbitrary, this is what I am just going to spend.
Ah, such a great answer. And I cannot believe it's already been 48 minutes. The amount of information, like chef's kiss. You can, man, you can never sleep on Black women because we be telling everybody, there's no gatekeeping in that world.
Right.
And as somebody who has no desire to look at these numbers and wants to hire, how do people go about hiring you or somebody that's comparable to you who do all of these things for them because they know they're genius and this ain't it? Talking about me, y'all.
That is funny. Yeah. So if you want to work with us, so we are a consulting company, and we specialize in Facebook and Instagram ads and kind of like connecting the dots with overall marketing strategy. And so the way like clients work with us when it comes to Facebook ads is, one, we have a course called Maximize with Ads. So if you want to go the DIY route and you're like, hey, I really want to understand the strategy, I want to understand the setup, I want to understand how to actually do this myself. So that way you can, control your budget. You're not having to outsource it to anybody, whatever, right? Like you want to go the DIY route. Our course is called Maximize with Ads. You can definitely send me a link. Send me a DM and I'll, get you a link to the course. Or you can go, take a watch of our live webinar. That probably would be our evergreen webinar. That might be a great next step for you to kind of really dig into like what our framework is and methodologies and how we teach and stuff like that. But of course, we have a Facebook group. I do office hours every month, so you do get that live support. But then you also get, the core knowledge, the templates, all the things. So you can go that route. But if you are looking for more handholding, you're like, hey, I really want to be able to train my in-house team on how to do this, whether it's just you and one other person or it's just you running your own ads, and you want to get them set up by experts, you want to get the training and education that you need in order to carry this forward, we definitely have an offer where we do Facebook ads setup for clients. And so you can definitely reach out to me via DM. And we could talk about it for sure and just figure out, where you're at and whether that offer or the course is the best course of action for you. But with that, it's like your ads are going to be launched within 30 days because we write the copy for you. We consult, help you with creative, all that kind of good stuff. We can do the tech setup. So that's the best way if you're like, hey, like I want to get my ads up and going in the within the next 30 days. I have been sitting on this and saying I'm going to run Facebook ads for months or years, and you're finally like, hey, I just need to go ahead and get the kick in the pants and get them started because you're not going to get any data, you're not going to get any results till you start, right? Like we can think about it as much as we want, but you really aren't going to know until you actually put it out there. So that's something that we do for clients. So you can definitely reach out to me via DM and we can kind of chat back and forth about whether, having our team actually set your ads up for you is the best route for you, or whether it will be best for you to go the course route. So that way you can get the office hours and the support, but you also just can have the course there where you can kind of, look at it and go back to it every time you need it.
I love it. Is there anything else that you want to share that we hadn't gone over in this time?
One thing I will share is something that always comes up is, the question of boosting posts. Like, should I be boosting posts? Because Facebook makes it so tempting, especially, podcasters. You post a reel, you post a post about your podcast, and Facebook's like, hey, you want to boost this $5, spend a little extra money. I advise against boosting posts. I think boosting posts are a waste of money. And the reason that I think boosted posts are a waste of money is because they're very limited. What a boosted post is essentially you telling Facebook, show this to people who are going to comment, like, and share. That's it. Like people show it to people who are more likely to engage with this post. And as we know, as business owners and podcasters, engagement doesn't pay the bills, right? Like I don't care how many people like it. I don't care how many people comment on it. Did you actually go and buy something? Did you become a lead? Did it start a DM conversation, right? Like, so that's what I care about. And that's what we as business owners care about. But with boosted posts, it's an engagement play. Because when you go into your Meta Business Suite, which is business.facebook.com, when you go into the back end of Ads Manager, you have a lot more flexibility in who you can target, meaning you can target people who are more sales focused. You can target people who are more likely to become a lead or someone who's more likely to engage with your videos and stuff like that. You can target your custom audiences. So people that go to your website and don't actually buy anything from you or don't take the desired action, you can retarget them and say, hey, you forgot to take this quiz or you forgot to download this lead magnet, you forgot to listen to this episode, right? You can retarget people who have gone to the page and who have, not taken the desired action. You have so much more flexibility with budgets and audiences and creative and all that kind of stuff. So I encourage you to save your coins instead of spending that $5 or $10 to boost that post. Just take that money and bank that and then start to figure out how you can invest in ads that are a long-term strategy that are going to bring you, give you more flexibility and will give you better results than boosted posts. So that's the last thing I would say about it. And I do talk about this in my webinar. So if you are like, hey, I really want to learn a little bit more about, the three things I said that you need to have in place in order to be successful with ads. You want to learn more about our hot ads framework, about like what your ads should look like, and the technical setup and all that kind of stuff. Definitely make sure you go take a look at our webinar. It's evergreen. You can watch it whenever you want. It's at stacyzeal.co/maximize. And you'll be able to kind of really get a bigger picture of like why boosting posts is a waste of money. I go into it a little bit deeper there. But then you'll also understand the core elements that you need in order to get started with ads and be successful.
I loved this conversation so much. As you were talking, I was dropping your links and your podcast in the chat so people can go in. They don't have to overwhelm you in your DMs. And I know you're super gracious, even if people do, but they can go to the comments and find you there. Thank you so much for your time and your genius. And this was just such an amazing conversation. And just from the engagement in the chat, I know that people got so much out of this. So thank you, Stacy.
Hey, I'm so excited. It was a great conversation for sure. Thanks again, y'all. I love to talk about ads. I love to talk about marketing. So it just lights me up when I get to.
The fact that ads are just such a foreign concept for me, and I think that like I retained information. So for that alone, you're phenomenal at explaining that.
Yes. I appreciate that.
My want ADHD be ADHD.
I tell you, I get it. So I'm like, how can I make this as short and sweet and to the point as possible? So yeah.
Thank you so much. I look forward to still stalking you in these Facebook streets. And again, everybody follow Stacy. She's incredibly knowledgeable and she's just a dope person. So thank you for spending your lunch with us and we appreciate you. Bye.